AI to Go podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of the AI to Go podcast. I'm Lucia, your host. And with me, of course, there is Johannes, my co-host. And today we're going to interview Agathe Balayn, which is a postdoctoral researcher at Microsoft Research. In particular, she works in the FATE group, which stands for Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics in AI. And she's based in New York City for today and for these past months. Agathe's work explores basically how machine learning systems interact with the real world and how they can sometimes cause unintended harm. So she looks beyond the algorithms to examine the social, organizational, and policy ecosystems surrounding AI. Of course, we're also going to dive into our own personal journey and get to know better the human behind the AI. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any insightful conversation on the future of AI. All right, let's get started.
Welcome, Agathe. Happy to have you here on the show. Let's start with your journey. You're originally from France. You studied in the Netherlands, lived in Japan, in Canada, in Germany, and now in New York at Microsoft. What are some of the habits you took from these countries that you still follow today, or some learnings that you took away?
First, thank you for introducing me and for welcoming me in the podcast. To answer your question, it's actually a challenging question. I'm not sure I really took many habits from each country, but maybe I have one example, especially since, Lucia, you said you're in the Netherlands. One thing I've started to do is to be very organized with my meetings, even with my friends. Maybe something you've noticed with Dutch people. Even when I plan to meet a friend, I will put it in my calendar and never forget it this way. I never had seen this too much in France, for instance, before that. But other than this, I'm not sure I actually really adopted habits, though I maybe changed more broadly my way of doing things. I think I've become more flexible with my schedule, for instance, since every of these countries, people there, for instance, have dinner at different times, have lunch at different times, different things. I kind of got used to, just be flexible and adapt to these different cultures. Maybe actually one more example from the Netherlands. It's pretty rainy there, maybe more than in New York City, for instance. And I really learned to become more resistant to weather conditions, for instance, and really go out even when it's really heavy rain, it's night, and it's cold. But really, even though it's bad conditions, going out and doing things. And on the other side, if it's actually very good weather conditions, maybe taking the opportunity to go out, even though I had other plans and doing fun things.
Awesome. Yeah, I shared that too. In the Netherlands, actually, they always say you're not made of sugar. So if it rains, you go out and you do things. Otherwise, you don't do anything. And, talking a little bit more about your backgrounds, of course, you are a scientist, right? At all the effects, you studied mathematics and engineering and so on, now working in AI. Where does your passion from science come from? Is there something you always had since you were a kid or something that you developed over time?
I think I was always quite passionate for science for various reasons. One of the main ones is just that I think in science and technology, or the technology that science can allow for, really has many benefits. And so I've just always been interested in science to understand how it can have all of these benefits. I especially think that science and technology bring us all of them infrastructures that are essential to our life. And so that's really exciting to be able to contribute to these infrastructures. I'm thinking, for instance, of just public transports that we have in Western countries. And recently I've been thinking a lot about the internet as an infrastructure that is essential and that has so many components. And it's really interesting to think about each of those and all the different disciplines that are required to set this up. But I also like not only the benefits it can bring, but just understanding how things work in general. I think since I'm very young, I really need to understand how things are working to enjoy the thing. I have a parallel to make with my other passion for art and for painting. I also practice, draw, and paint. And when I go to an exhibition, for instance, I always really like to look at each stroke that the painters made and try and understand which colors they used, how they combine the colors, more than just look at the painting more broadly and understand like the emotions conveyed by the painting. And I really think it's similar for science. I really need to understand the inner functioning behind whatever technology I'm looking at. So yeah, I think these are the main motivations for me to work in science. And maybe a last point is that I'm not actually only interested in these benefits of science more broadly or its technical functionings, but I think for me what's really important is to understand all the socio-technical questions. So actually combining these two kind of questions together and really trying to understand how the science or the technology impacts society, both in good and bad ways. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. Thanks for sharing. Sounds like you're on a strong mission and you found some purpose in your work here, as we are learning in a minute. We saw that during your studies at, I hope I pronounced it correctly, ENSTA. That's thank you. That's one of France's most prestigious engineering universities. You were part of ENSTA Robotique. That's a robotics association who is building autonomous robots, and they are competing in the French Cup of Robotics. Now, I'm a huge robotics fan. We see all these delivery robots now in the streets in San Francisco. I just got my cleaning robot, and I'm a big fan because it works much better than I would ever have imagined. So tell us, what are the craziest robots that you've seen at the competition or as part of the Robotics Association's work?
Yeah, I would say actually I like your example with the vacuum cleaning robots, for instance, because I feel a lot of the robots that are built for this competition have a similar idea. It's a lot of robots which are on typically 4 wheels, maybe a few less, a few more, but that's the general idea, and that should be able to move within some kind of flat environment, or rather flat, and be able to identify certain objects and pick them up and bring them to another location, place them there. So yeah, I'm actually not sure that's what I saw the craziest robots, maybe. But definitely it's really fun to work on this during the studies in engineering school, because you really build a few important skills and just get to participate in these competitions. That's really fun. But yeah, because I have also other experiences in robotics, I saw maybe more unusual robots there, or the robots that are not within our homes necessarily. So for instance, I worked several times with humanoid robots. You might have heard of Nao or Asimo from Honda, for instance. It's like humanoid robots on 2 legs, 2 feet, 2 arms, and they are typically pretty cute, different sizes. It's really fun to work with and interact with them. I also worked actually in Germany on industry robots. For instance, these arms that are used in factories to again pick and place things. So that was also a very different kind from the humanoid ones, but pretty useful and fun to work with. And maybe a last thing, I think that was the craziest thing I've seen, was in Japan. I don't know if you've heard of the Hebocon. It's a kind of... It's actually a festival, kind of, with people bringing the robots they built themselves. And the idea is that the robots should function in a weird way or not function at all. And you should really Google it and look at videos of this robot competition. So you have 2 robots fighting against each other for like a sumo competition to stay within the ring, and the other pushing it out of the ring. But it's really weird robots. Like one of them had a Barbie instead of an arm, and the Barbie was spinning and trying to push out the other robot from the field. You should really look at this.
We should put some video footage of that, Johannes, on this video.
I can send you a link later.
Awesome. And Agathe, I would also like to talk about some of your achievement, in particular one that you got about 2 years ago, when you were selected by the Fondation L'Oréal UNESCO for Women in Science program as one of the 5 rising talents for their research in the life sciences and STEM. What did that recognition mean to you?
Yeah, I think many things. It was really rewarding actually to receive this recognition. One thing first is that typically I'm just in the lab or in front of my computer at least. In my work, I do a lot of studies, talking with developers of AI systems. And typically, sometimes I get to go wherever they are working, but very often I'm just behind the computer. And then I just spend hours to analyze the transcripts of these interviews I do with the developers. Otherwise, I just spend so much time looking at policy documents or the technical reports, analyzing them. So I don't really necessarily take a break and think more broadly about the impact of my research. And we also typically don't necessarily make a lot of compliments to each other in computer science fields. So it was just really nice to take a break and notice how I've progressed along in my career and the achievements I've made. So that was really nice. I also was very happy to see the field more generally recognized. So my research is really at this intersection between computer science, the technical aspects of AI, and the societal and policy aspects of it. And I thought it was really cool that a prize that is focused on STEM also recognized the importance of this interdisciplinary work. And yeah, for instance, from personal experience, I've heard several times that in computer science, we shouldn't necessarily look at these social aspects of the technology, and that maybe it's not considered computer science or not a hard science. So that the prize recognized it made me really happy. And overall, it was also just very nice to meet other women that are also in STEM, potentially in many very different disciplines, but still also experiencing the same challenges and also the same achievements. So it was really a nice award, actually.
Now that you mentioned the STEM field, it's no secret that this is today even still a predominantly a men's world, right?
Yeah.
As of today, for example, less than 20% of women work in engineering on similar roles in the industry. Why do you think is that? And how would you convince more women to build a career in science? And maybe what role can men play into that?
Yeah, well, first, I think that's why the prize exists, is to kind of really directly recognize women in science and bring more representation in this field. But I want to say I'm not studying gender studies or it's not really the topic of my research, so I maybe can't answer really comprehensively. But from my personal experiences, there has been challenges in working in this field, but also from my research, so I was saying I conduct a lot of interviews with developers. I try to have quite a great diversity of developers based on their gender, but also ethnicity, age, etc. And so from hearing what they are also telling me, I can also bring some answer to your question, I think. But I think, overall, it can be challenging for various reasons. I can also share links later to studies I've read as well and to other podcasts I've listened to on the topic. One thing is really the, let's say, image that women have in STEM, or the assumptions that are made about the capabilities of women in STEM. Especially, I think, in our Western world, where as you said, there are fewer women than men in the field, and we, typically not necessarily think that it's the place of women, or we didn't used to think about this. But there are actually a lot of counterexamples, I think. So in the past, when computers started to be developed, actually software was the space for women to work on, and hardware was the more male-dominated space. But women were actually dominating in the software space. So it's also interesting to see that, in the past it was different. And so we should maybe question our understanding or assumptions about the role of women nowadays based on these past examples. Also, I think in other cultures, especially in the East, women actually have much more, take much more space in this field. So again, I think there are many counterexamples that we need to think about. But these assumptions that people might have are one of the factors maybe that go against women entering the field. In that sense, I think representation is pretty important. And again, that's why I think the award was useful, but we need to bring even more examples of women in STEM slowly to encourage more people to join. I think now there are quite a few actually explicit measures that are taken, at least in the academic world, to bring and retain women in STEM. So I'm thinking of especially what people call positive discrimination as well, like hiring committees which have certain quotas for women, trying also to tackle more or less implicit or explicit biases that the communities might have. But I'm sure much more has to be done, but at least there are these first small steps that are taken. I think one thing also from my personal experience is that the atmosphere across within a lab might really impact your work, your motivation, whether you want to stay in one place or the other. And I've seen, especially when there are fewer women in the lab, it might be more difficult. Now I've been across maybe 5 or so labs, and I really feel the difference across all of these labs. So just changing the atmosphere, one more woman will join, that will also change naturally, I think, is an important thing. And then I don't know if you've ever heard, but in the AI context very specifically, there are more and more discussions about what is valued for AI research especially. And typically when we think about AI, a lot of people think about the algorithmic work behind AI, so the various types of algorithms that can be used and how to optimize these algorithms, so the very mathematical questions behind. And potentially it's not the only, for sure it's not the only question that should be tackled in relation to AI, but maybe these are questions that women want to tackle less than men in a way. Typically we say maybe women are more interested in these social technical topics like the ones I'm working on. And just because it's necessarily less recognized, this social technical work or the policy work we're doing, it's less encouraging to stay within the AI context specifically. So I think that's definitely something important, thinking about what we reward. And you were asking what can men do in this? I think not only men, but actually everybody working in the field should think about what we want to achieve, and then what should be prioritized. Should we still just reward this algorithmic work? Typically in conferences as well, these are the types of papers that are accepted over these more social technical works, more qualitative works. So just really thinking the structures to organize the research, I think is another important step beyond what I was talking about, like positive discrimination efforts, for instance. And other than that, I think there are so many other factors, for instance, in the way women are raised, in the types of how work is organized for women, and many other things. I can also share more links with you. A lot of studies have tackled some of these factors that might impact how women enter the field and stay in the field.
So maybe you can be an example, right? At least for those listening to us. Can you tell us a little bit more about your research role at Microsoft? And maybe you can talk about some of the projects you're currently working on. And maybe this is going to give a little more precise glimpse into what does a researcher like you do every day.
Yeah, of course. So at Microsoft, as you said before, I'm a postdoctoral researcher within Microsoft Research in New York. And actually, there are many more research labs at Microsoft. I think there are 13 around the world. And typically, the work or the objective of these research labs, other than contributing to the greater research community in general. It's also to inform the company, the engineering efforts, but also the policy and the governance work that the company is doing. And so in my case, similarly to a postdoc at a university, my main mission is to contribute to the research community, actually do research and publish research papers, and also ideally do research that can be impactful within the company as well. To talk specifically about my own research, I'd say right now I'm having 3 main research directions, and they touch upon all of these different topics. So the first one is looking into AI governance. Because there are so many stakeholders who are involved in producing the AI systems, we really need to create some kind of workflows or guidelines to help all of these stakeholders build the AI systems responsibly. And so in my PhD beforehand, I was especially looking into how the developers of the AI system think about the systems, about the potential implications they might have, and trying to design tools and guidelines to help them further develop the systems with fewer biases, for instance, fewer unfairness issues. And now I've been expanding this from just the developers to all the other stakeholders involved. So that might be, for instance, product managers, policy teams, engineers, the data scientists, etc., and how they can, I'm trying to understand how they can collaborate all together to help them build these systems more responsibly. And for that, the kind of work I do is a lot of interview-based work. So actually trying to understand how they are currently working, what are their needs, and how can we support them better. One very specific example, to be more concrete, is that now with new AI systems, like what you can think of ChatGPT, for instance, we need to be able to evaluate these systems before deploying them, because we need to understand what might be benefits, but also potential negative impacts of the systems. So a lot of people are now working on evaluating the systems within Microsoft, but also in the broader industry and in academia. And the work is a lot focusing on building algorithms or data sets to help with these evaluations. But again, we don't necessarily know what we want to evaluate, but we build these algorithms, data sets, etc., because that's what we're used to do as computer scientists. So in my work, I'm trying to take a step back and actually understand what the different stakeholders need when we talk about evaluations. And so, ask them directly, but also look at their practices and try to critically reflect on their practices to see, what can be a better or more comprehensive evaluation framework that wouldn't be just technical, not just algorithm-centered, but also looking at the social aspects of it. Another work I do is more on the policy side and the regulations for AI. So again, when we think about technologies that like ChatGPT, these are general purpose technologies, arguably. So the idea is that contrary to previous AI systems, for instance, they can have many more potential usages. People can use them for many different applications. And so that makes it very difficult to regulate, because it's one of the first technologies that is like this, that can be used for so many things. And we don't know really how to regulate them. So I'm trying to gather all of this documentation that has already been produced and map out this landscape of usages or reports that people make about usages, so that ideally in the long term, I can help policymakers get more informed about these usages and help them regulate later on the systems. To go to the last direction, I'm also, as a researcher, I think I should also really remain critical and really understand what's happening in practice and constantly reinterrogate what we already think we know, what we've established. And so my last direction is to always try and understand harms that AI can cause. So we know of many harms that we can also talk about, but there might be harms that we don't yet know of. And especially with new technologies, new potentially undesirable impacts might arise. So my last research direction is actually to study these harms that we don't know yet of, And for this, I again do a lot of interview-based work, but this time I really try to focus on very specific applications of AI systems. For instance, I did this study on pig farming and how people use AI systems to support, for instance, farmers or veterinarians for raising their pigs. And there I'm looking at how the way we produce the systems might impact the farmers in ways that we hadn't yet thought of. So for instance, to produce the systems, we actually need to change a lot what the farms look like. We need to bring the internet, because typically a lot of farms are not really connected, but for AI systems to function, we need an internet connection. Very often it's computer vision systems, so we need cameras in the farm so that we can get data and then infer certain things about the pigs. But of course, most farms don't have cameras, and it's actually hard to install the cameras. So we need a lot of things, which creates quite a lot of cost for the farmers, and especially in the small farms that typically, where the budget is typically very tight. We really put some economic pressure on the farmers, and this kind of economic side of things is not typically something we discuss in the context of AI. So that would be an example of harm that I identified from my research. But there are many more examples I could give you. But overall, just all these social technical aspects and policy aspects is what's interesting to me.
Oh, that's incredible. Sounds like a very broad scope here in terms of research. Sounds also like data collection still remains one key barrier to be able to evaluate and assess the impact of AI systems. In your list of publications that we reviewed before we have the interview today, we noted that there's a strong focus on bias, fairness, and inequality. Can you, for an audience that is new to the topic, can you describe how the process looks like, how bias replicates, what bias is, and how it replicates in current AI models? Maybe you can share also some examples here.
Yeah, definitely. I will try at least. I think, again, that's an interesting and tough question, because there are different types of biases or inequalities that AI can cause. I think the one that people perhaps already know of, and that most of my research, at least initially, has focused on, is the biases that are related to the outputs of the systems. So for instance, if we look back at my pig farming example, we might have a camera that takes pictures of a pig, and then we have the AI system, and the AI system will tell us whether the pig is sick or not. That could be something. But this output, whether the pig is sick or not, might be incorrect. And bias is typically when this output is incorrect, but these errors are also correlated to a specific category of population. So maybe for the pig example, it's not that relevant, but you can actually think of different breeds of pigs and the system being more often incorrect for certain breeds than others. But typically, we also discuss this for more human-centered systems. So you might have heard of the Google Computer Vision API. A few years ago, it was used when you take photos to categorize the photos on your phone. And people discovered that it was always or almost always classifying Black people as gorillas, and that would be an example of bias. So the output of the algorithm, so the gorilla label, is wrong, and it's highly correlated with a very specific type of population. So in this case, the darker skin color people. So that would be one of the typical examples of bias in AI, and that's really problematic in various ways. It depends what you do with this output. So with the Google Computer Vision API, it can be offensive to the users of the systems. There are other cases where the outputs might be used to make actual decisions. And again, that might have an impact on who we make the decision for. So in the Netherlands, for instance, there is this famous example of the welfare benefit scandal, where an algorithm was used by the government to identify who might be frauding for welfare benefits. And maybe 3 years ago now or so, a bit more. this algorithm was identified to be also biased because it was often telling people were fraudsters. Actually, they were not. And this was always people typically from underprivileged families, for instance. Also, I think from, again, certain ethnicities and not others. But this would be another example of bias. And where does it come from? Indeed, as you said, data is typically a problem. If you work with biased data, which is often the case because the data comes from somewhere, and typically humans are still biased actually. So the data they produce are also biased, and then when you train the system, we will reproduce the bias. So that's definitely one of the main causes for this. I think if we look more broadly, also the developers of the AI systems that I saw in my previous studies might not be aware of this topic. They might not think about the fact that the systems might be biased, or they might not even know what kind of biases to look for. And so again, that's very challenging for them, but it's also very hard to solve. In my studies, I noticed, for instance, that building toolkits or like guidelines for the developers to tackle these biases is very difficult because all developers have different backgrounds and would need to potentially personalize these tools and help them understand the actual real world impact of these biases. These are data set biases are one of the main challenges, and identifying these biases at the outputs as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I think just as a follow-up to make it clearer, because it sounds very abstract, right? So we have bias in the data set, and that might cause certain outcomes. Can you give us a few examples to expand a little bit of like what the implications are if we train an AI system with a biased training data set, what that might imply?
Yeah, so maybe looking back at the for instance, the Google Computer Vision API, I imagine that the data sets was biased in a sense that there were probably fewer images of darker skin color people than lighter skin colored people. So the system maybe learned that a person typically has a lighter skin. So on an image, it's something that is of lighter colors than darker. So because of this, when the model, the AI system learns from the data sets, it will learn the correlation between, probably this lighter skin color and that it's a person, but it might not learn that the darker skin color might also be a person. And instead, probably it saw quite a few examples of, for instance, the gorilla example, since it was, the darker skin color people were confused with gorillas. And so, because of this, somehow it learned to associate that something that has a darker skin would be a gorilla. So then when you will give a new image of a person to the AI system, it might either say person or a gorilla. So that's how it works. Why is it problematic? Well, in this very specific case, I think it's primarily that it's very offensive. Of course, it's also inconvenient if you're looking for a picture of your friend, but in your Google photo album, but the system doesn't find your friend because it thought it's a gorilla. So that's also very, in terms of usability, it's not great, but it's also very offensive. That's something. But there are many more examples. So since I'm in the US now, you might also have heard of Joy Bualwalmini, who worked on this gender shade study. She basically showed something similar to the Google Computer Vision API in this gorilla example, but she showed that many computer vision systems typically make more mistakes for Black women compared to white men. It also makes more mistakes, for instance, for Black men than white men. So anyway, there's a bias based on color or ethnicity and also gender there. And there has been cases in the US where the systems were used, for instance, by the police to identify people. And actually, it made mistakes, especially for the Black people, saying this person was actually the one committing a crime, but it was not actually the case. And so that led to this person being arrested while this person had not committed any crime. So you can, imagine many impacts on people's lives as well.
Thanks, Agathe. I think it's you made it very concrete, right? So it has so many implications that sometimes we don't even realize, right? Because I mean, on a daily life, we're not always thinking about like big questions, right? So that's good that there are at least people working on it, right? So trying to remove these problems and really have a more ethical approach, right, to AI. And that actually kind of leads me to my next question, right? Now, of course, everybody now is talking about AI. And I mean, the big push on the development of AI is pretty much done by private companies, right? So, well, Microsoft, but we have OpenAI, Google, we mentioned them, right? So how do these companies manage to balance ethics and commercial needs? Because then, I mean, at the end of the day, they're businesses, right? So there is competition, there is fast growth of the technology, right? So there is always a delicate balance. So what do they do, to manage this balance?
Yeah, good question. I think that's always a challenge for sure. I think if we look at the research side of the companies, we're more and more researchers working on these topics, obviously. And trying to develop concrete tools to support the developers of the systems, but also all these other stakeholders, as I was mentioning before, to do their work more responsibly. But at the same time, many of the studies I also conducted myself talking to these developers did hint at some tension potentially between ethics, their ethics work that maybe they might do on the side next to their main job, so with less time, and so the commercial needs of the company. There might be a tension there, but at the same time, sometimes ethics actually can be a business incentive, especially now that we have AI regulations, at least in the European Union. Well, companies have to abide to these regulations, so there has to be workflows, guidelines, maybe algorithms put in place to abide to these regulations and to make the systems more ethical, more responsible. So in a way, AI ethics and these regulations can also be an incentive for the businesses. But to what extent different companies can do this work also differs. So for instance, if I go back to my pig farming example, typically the companies that build these AI systems are small startups. And so, small startups have even more economic pressure to also just survive. And so these startups might be much less well equipped to tackle these issues of ethics than larger companies. So that's definitely something as well. I think if we look at larger companies, like for Microsoft, we could say the companies are much more proactive in that case. So you see more researchers hired on this topic. But more broadly, I think the company is really trying to tackle the issues before the systems are deployed, actually also envision the potential harms before potentially even developing the systems themselves. In the case of Microsoft, there are specific responsible AI, we call it principles, that exist, standards as well. All this has to be followed for the researchers, but also within the product teams of the company. So at Microsoft, for instance, the company also works with the customers to get feedback. So it's very iterative, the development, and they get real world feedback to reiterate on these systems and improve the final systems. And they, like, as I do a bit in my work, they also contribute to the policy discussion. So globally as well, working with the governments to refine the standards and the regulations to ensure that the AI systems are produced more responsibly.
You just mentioned that you also work with regulators in order to educate them and to shape like future politics and future regulation. Now, the geopolitical landscape is very fluid and very dynamic in today's world. Does the political landscape influence big tech in their pursuit of AI? And if yes, in what way and to what extent?
I think, and of course, policies influence how we develop AI systems. and it can be really a challenge as well. So especially nowadays, one company develops an AI system in one country, but then the system will be deployed in many countries, and each of these countries might have a different regulations for AI or different standards, depends. So for instance, in European Union, we have the AI Act. We also have the GDPR, for instance, which also applies to AI systems. In the UK, in Canada, in Australia, they have other regulations. And so the AI systems will have to be adapted to each of these regulations. So that's definitely a challenge, but has to be done. But I think, there actually maybe more interplays between big techs and the policy landscape. Because next to having to follow, the regulations, the policies, big tech is also engaged actively with the governments to, enhance current policies, make them more adapted to the reality of how AI systems work. Maybe a simple example: when we had the first draft of the AI Act in the European Union, there was a very simple understanding of what an AI system is. So what we briefly said before, we have a data set, we have an algorithm, we train this algorithm on the data set, we get to an AI system that we can use in practice. But in reality, it's much more complex than just this data set and this algorithm. There are many companies involved. Several companies might build a data set, label the data sets, others might build first model, others might build another system on top of this first system, etc. And the AI Act didn't take this into account, but then with the next iterations and with, participations of researchers in industry and in academia, then this kind of AI supply chain, we call it, was taken into account, and the Act is more reflecting the reality of what's happening in practice. There is this interaction. And just overall, it's just very difficult to create these policies for AI because we don't understand all the impacts that AI might have, because different countries also may potentially disagree on how we should regulate these systems. For instance, we tend to hear that in the European Union, we might be too pro-regulation and we might hinder innovation. Instead, in the US, we might say that they're too pro-innovation. On the contrary, even within the European Union, we have the AI Act, but now there are some researchers that start to show that different countries might have different interests. That maybe, for instance, France wants to remove some of the constraints because there are quite promising tech companies in the country, so it's better to help them further. There are also researchers, I can again share papers later, who show that certain countries might want to adapt the regulations based on their political orientation. For instance, certain parties might want more surveillance of its citizens, and AI can serve to that, and so they would want to adapt the regulation to allow for this. Other parties might disagree with this opinion. So there are lots of debates for the policies, and I think we need more stakeholders to contribute, both companies, but also other researchers, civil society, etc.
Great. And Agathe, so before you were mentioning, right, about, one thing that you're looking at is also the potential harm, right, of AI. So what are the top risks, right, the top main risks that are related to AI as of today? Because, of course, we don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know what's going to happen in a few years from now. So really from an insider's perspective, right? So what are the main harms and risks that AI poses today?
Yeah, good question. It's very hard to tell. There are no taxonomies of AI risks or AI harms that exist. And depending on the taxonomy, there are different categorizations that are made. And I think some of these taxonomies show more than 100 types of harm. So it's very hard to summarize in a few sentences, but I'll try to mention some of the ones that I've seen being discussed the most. So actually what we discussed before, the biases and these different kinds of harms that the biases can lead to, I think is where most of the research and the industry is currently still focusing on, and also civil society. And my work has definitely shown that it's still very difficult to challenge this, because we need to make the developers aware of these issues, and we always discover more issues, etc. I think with new types of AI systems, there are also other risks that arise. So for generative AI systems like ChatGPT, we start to understand better also the impact that the systems themselves might have on individuals, similar to social media platforms, for instance, in the past. So understanding how the systems might, or someone interacting with a system, it might impact their mental health. It might impact how people learn new skills, etc., if they use or not the system. So there is also more and more research focus on it, I think. Then we haven't discussed this too much, but AI systems might also cause different kinds of inequalities. So we know that to develop the systems, we need a lot of material resources, hardware to create this hardware, we need to mine specific materials, and to build the hardware, then we need energy to run the data centers, the algorithms, etc. And so all these kind of resources that are needed are typically coming from more the global south. And so producing these AI systems might actually impact further the global south more than the global north. But there are actually more and more reports tackling this problem. So like the environmental impact, for instance, at Microsoft now, I think every year there is a report about the emissions of the company in relation to AI. So yeah, I think these are the main challenges. And then, the last point I think is understanding new risks that we don't yet understand. So I mentioned with the pig farming case, for instance, the economic risks. And I think there are, again, more risks on the jobs that we have, for instance. And we need further research on this too.
AI can be used for good and bad, as we've seen today. Let's end on the good use of AI. What are the most exciting developments that you think will help humanity move forward when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I think I actually have to nuance your question because I'm not sure I can really pinpoint to one specific application. How I see it is that with any other technology, we actually have to balance pros and cons of the technology of AI systems in our case. And so, maybe to give a concrete example, I heard someone recently make the analogy between ChatGPT and fast food. So they were saying that using ChatGPT is like eating fast food. Well, it is tasty, it is nice to use, it's practical, but at the same time, it can have negative impacts on your health for the fast food. It can have maybe impact on your learning skills, learning processes in case of ChatGPT. And so we need to kind of learn to use it responsibly, or it's fast food, junk food just occasionally maybe. So in a sense, for instance, in my case, I really like using ChatGPT to develop my inspiration. So as a researcher, I need to write research papers. I typically write the paper, and then I will take a paragraph, and I will ask ChatGPT to reformulate it and give me inspiration to make better sentences, for instance. It's especially very useful for me since I'm not a native English speaker. That really helps me. But at the same time, should I always use it to give me inspiration for my sentences? Or should I sometimes just spend more time on it, but actually develop my, let's say, reformulation skills in this case? So that's really a trade-off that I think we all have to do for ourselves. I'm also thinking, for instance, that maybe by using ChatGPT and speeding up my process of writing my papers, writing them nicely, it's great because hopefully in the long term, then I don't have to do as much work. I can work a bit of a shorter time. And so that would be great. But at the same time, we have to see as a society that by being more productive, we don't start to work even more and more and actually never really stop this increase in the amount of work we do. So yeah, again, I think there is a balance to make here, and I think AI is very exciting for me to help me with inspiration in my work, but also in my art, for instance. It's exciting because it can increase my productivity, but hopefully also lower my amount of work. But yeah, we need to make sure that we use it responsibly in this case.
Great. Agathe, thank you so much. This was really insightful and we learned a lot. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. Now, to finish the episode, we prepared a little game for you, our end of the episode game. For you today, we prepared the little true or false game. Now, how does it work? Of course, we're going to share with you some facts, all about AI, of course. Some of them will be true. Some of them will not be true. And of course, we want to test your knowledge. And specifically for you, we chose today some more like science related and robotics related topics. So let's see how well she's going to do, huh, Johannes? Let's test Agathe.
Let's test, yeah, exactly. And also the scientific reasoning behind Agathe, behind your answer. No, I'm just kidding. Let's start with the first statement, and you have to determine if it's true or false. Researchers trained AI to detect early stage Alzheimer from speech patterns. Is that a true or false statement?
I think that should be true. I don't know whether it really works, but I guess it's true.
Perfect. Yeah, you answered correctly. It's true. There are multiple studies that already show that ML tools can predict Alzheimer's risk just from voice with an accuracy of up to 80%.
Oh, nice.
All right, for the next one, since we talked about robots, so there is a robot comedian called John the Robot that performs stand-up comedy by adapting jokes based on the audience reactions. Is it true or false?
That's more tricky. I would say false, but yeah, I'm on the fence.
All right. Yes, we tricked her. It is actually true. It was created by the Oregon State Universities. It's called John the Robot and basically uses the AI to time punchlines and then changes jokes dynamically based on what the audience is doing. I think many comedians would like to have that ability. Huh? So that's quite exciting.
Was it like a stand-up comedian robot then?
Yeah, John the Robot.
Are you ready for the next one, Agathe?
Yes, of course.
So there's an AI in Japan that independently created a new element in the periodic table. Is that true or false?
I think it depends how you interpret the question in a way. Like, what does it really mean to create a new element? I'm not so sure.
It did the research and found a new element in the periodic system.
I think it's false.
Are we locking in false?
Yeah.
That is correct, yes. Creating new elements requires a dedicated setup like nuclear reactors, and AI as of today is not able to perform physical synthesis. So it's not possible to create new elements. Maybe in the future, in the next few years, maybe as part of your research, we will see, but not today. So you're correct.
Yeah, now we see agentic AI, the next thing after generative AI, which should not only like interact, speak to you, but actually can potentially act physically. So maybe that will be a topic next time. Yeah.
Indeed. All right. So 2 out of 3 so far. So that's good. Let's see with the next one. So there is a sentient AI named Eden that refused to shut down during an ethics experiment. Is it true or false?
During what kind of experiment?
An ethical experiment.
I would say yes for this, true. No.
Ooh, it's false, actually. There is no sentient AI yet. Again,
Yes, I agree.
we always have to say yet because we're We're so close to so much changing, right? So we don't know. But so far it's really science fiction. So for now, AI still has to listen to what we tell it for now.
I mean, that there is no sentient AI, I totally agree, but that an AI wouldn't say no to whatever you ask it, this, I don't know.
Are you ready for the last one? See if it's sci-fi or science.
Okay.
Let's go. So there's an AI that helped discover the antibiotic halicin. That's an effective. That's proven effective against drug-resistant bacteria.
I think that should be true.
Locking in, true?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is correct. The MIT used an AI to discover halicin, and this has proven strong antibacterial properties in the first test. So that is correct.
Yeah, before you were asking me about exciting applications of AI, actually, I think, in healthcare, it has definitely promises. It's quite exciting there, yes.
Very good. So 3 out of 5. I think that's very good. Pretty much the average in this game. So that means Johannes and I are getting better at choosing difficult questions. So that's good. But we're not there yet, Johannes. We need to make them even more difficult.
Have you enjoyed the game, Agathe?
Yeah, very much. I think I need to play more to become better at it, to train myself.
Like next time we send you all the games so you can prepare.
Exactly. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much, Agathe, for joining and for sharing your thoughts, your research at Microsoft. It was a pleasure having you. And thanks everyone for staying with us. If you made it to the end of the video, please make sure to subscribe, like, and share with your friends, your colleagues, your family. And of course, if you have any feedback, ideas, or just wanted to say hi, don't be shy and leave us a comment below. That's it for now. Have a great rest of your day. Au revoir, ciao, and auf Wiedersehen from us. Bye.
Don't forget to subscribe to the AI to Go podcast.